Whether your beer is in a bottle, can, or glass, kick back and relax. It's Better on Draft.
Welcome, everyone. Episode 261, Better on Draft Podcast. My name is Ken. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Friday evening. If you're listening to us via podcast, you can actually join us live 7 p.m. Fridays at youtube.com/Better on Draft and facebook.com/Better on Draft, or just betterondraft.tv. Easy to remember. We're going to go around and see what everyone is drinking real quick. For myself, I've got from the brand new Tenacity Craft in Detroit, their 116 proof bourbon, which is really nice, smoky, delicious. I thought it was going to be a bit overpowering for me, but something I can sip on and enjoy without slamming. So I'm going to be happy and enjoying this great brewery turned distillery. Rob, what do you got over there?
Right now, I have got the barrel-aged Black Excellence, which was made in collaboration with Eastern Market Brewing Company and Wren House out in Arizona, which they saved some of what they made last year to barrel-age it in, I think it's in Willet barrels, but there's this one. And then on top of that, I broke out with some Black Calder, the Bougie Sweet Potato Pie Stout, which I will be enjoying a bit as well. So there's that. Those are my two.
What about you, Dan? What do you got over there?
Well, if you couldn't guess, I've got the old Stolian soda going on right now.
I mean, that's always been you, though. When you pick a
That's
drink,
true.
you sit with it. Like, I remember you used to bring Newcastle every single week for a good probably year straight.
Yep.
But Wendy, what about you? What do you got over there? You're muted,
down
Wendy.
on my video.
There we go.
There you go.
I am drinking Eastern Market Brewing Company's Sticky Fingers Stout. It is their mint chocolate chip stout. I'm still not 100% sold on mint in beer, but this one is not as mouthwashy as most are, and I like the dark chocolate flavor in there.
The North Center Brewing, one of our sponsors, and Loaded Dice did a collab of Kentucky Commons, where they both brewed a Kentucky Common and then added mint to it for the Kentucky Derby. I told him personally, so he knows, but I prefer the Loaded Dice version better. The North Center was just way too minty, and that might be something for you. Is that there might be just a certain level of mint that you need. Anything more is too much. But we do have a guest. Why don't you introduce yourself? Why don't you tell us what you do and what you're drinking and where it's from and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, thanks for letting me join this week. My name is Bart Watson. I'm the chief economist at the Brewers Association, so I track all things numbers-based in brewing. And right now I'm drinking a Colorado beer, a Telluride Brewing Co.'s Face Down Brown. So doing my part to keep brown ales going and growing.
I already told him pre-show that we're going to be best friends. Why don't you give us the bare bones? What is a chief economics officer, and what is your role at the Brewers Association? Like, what is your day-to-day kind of or year, month-to-month operation?
Yeah, so for any listeners who aren't aware of the Brewers Association, we're the national not-for-profit trade association, represents America's small and independent craft brewers. So we promote and protect. We put on events like the Great American Beer Festival and the Craft Brewers Conference. And then we provide resources to members, government affairs, business resources, and statistical resources. And I lead, kind of the data side of that. So, I run our annual surveys. I provide market analysis for brewers. So if they want to know, how many breweries are in X place, or, how are saisons selling, and, right now, I try to have a data point for whatever breweries need to run their businesses best. And so my day-to-day is very varied. Sometimes it's economic impact analysis for government affairs. Sometimes it's the things that members have emailed me, brewers who want to know about a certain trend or, demographics or whatever it is. And then some of it's, bigger long-term projects that we work on tracking the industry.
All right. So I guess I'll start with a couple of questions that I have here. Obviously, with looking at numbers, and I swear, like when I'm looking at these graphs, it kind of just definitely feels close to home for myself as well, because I do a little bit of data analytics at my day job, dealing with automotive fault codes. So it's like every time I'm looking at this, I feel like these are done in Tableau. I don't know if you use Tableau, but it's just like I keep seeing that like all the time when I'm looking at the information. But kind of when you look at the economics between what we have with craft beer, and then obviously I'm sure you look at the numbers from the macro as well. It does tend to seem like, as we're trying to promote craft beer and have a bigger market share with craft beer, that there's always this battle that keeps happening between craft beer and macro. And I wouldn't say it's more of a cold war, because you always just see it in commercials and things like that. But is when you're looking at those numbers and trying to find a bigger place for the craft market, does kind of that cold war between craft beer and the macro take precedence over having to make sure that we have a bigger market share in beer in general? Because there's always I've always seen those discussions where people will say that craft and macro should do a better job of getting along because wine and spirits are going to make them obsolete, which I don't know how beer becomes obsolete anyway, but
yeah, it's a great question. And it's something, we think about and talk about a lot, because, sometimes we're working with the large brewers on promoting brand beer or initiatives that help all brewers, at the government affairs levels. And sometimes, we're fighting them in the trenches, for shelf space, for distributor space. There's only so many tap handles out there. There's only so much shelf space. There's only so much, space on distributor trucks. So, when push comes to shove, there is going to be competition there. And, what we at the Brewers Association really try to do is, we use this tagline a lot, differentiate, not denigrate. So find ways to tell the craft story as positively as possible without taking shots at the large brewers, because it does benefit small brewers when a bar puts in more tap handles as opposed to, more back bar space for wine or spirits. I mean, that's an opportunity for craft brewers to win those tap handles, and the large brewers as well. And we want to create an environment where there's as much opportunity for brewers as possible, and then arm the craft brewers so within that opportunity they can go out and kick butt in the marketplace and hopefully win as much share as possible. But it is an ongoing tension, and there's always going to be that balance between parts of the market that are competitors, but also trying to educate people about beer generally and bring people into the beer category. We all win when somebody with their first thought is, I'm going to get a beer. And then their next thought is, what beer is it going to be?
Mm-hmm. Now, and I guess going into that, where we're trying to get everyone to win, there is another discussion that tends to happen in terms of somewhat of a saturation. We've got craft beer, but then we've got non-alcoholic beer. We just had conversations with Groundbreaker and Two Roots about gluten-free beer and non-alcoholic beer. And then we have seltzers that's in there as well. Just this variety of offerings that are being thrown out there. Are those also being tracked? And if so, how does that kind of translate in terms of, what you were saying about shelf space competition and getting those out there while still trying to make sure that craft beer has its due?
Yeah, we do track, those tangential markets, not always quite as closely, but, non-alcoholic, we're certainly tracking and watching, especially as a lot of craft brewers make that. I think the best way to describe it is, that they are competitors to a certain extent, both again for space, but maybe not as much as, some direct products, because, if you go into a retailer, they're often going to be adding, space for, a better than you or a non-alcoholic, section. Also, in terms of consumer dollars, I think they're not as one-to-one a competitor. When somebody goes in and they're looking to buy a non-alcoholic 6-pack, it's probably not, one less, or, maybe sometimes it is, but it's not as frequently one less, 6-pack of craft beer. Maybe it's a 6-pack of, sparkling water or some other non-alcoholic product. So, the consumer overlap there, I think is, there is some, right? And those could be the same consumers, a craft consumer who wants to buy a beer and a non-alcoholic beer. But it's not as closely one-to-one. And these are exactly the kind of things that I spend my time thinking about, and I try to provide, consumers insight on. So, for instance, we do a national survey with 2,000 representative people all around the country who drink craft beer. And we ask them about these trends. Are you more interested in non-alcoholic beer? Are you more interested in, these kind of better for you wellness characteristics? And then give the brewers the data, so that they can line it up against their consumers and say, okay, maybe it makes sense for us to enter the space because, our demographic that we know is also really highly aligned with these trends, or maybe it isn't. But that's, some of the stuff that I get to think about every day, and is really fun to kind of dig into and try to investigate.
Yeah. Now, and with those trends, I saw in another interview, I can't remember where I saw it, but you were talking about the demographics and how with craft beer that in looking at those being obviously the millennials being, within that roughly 25 to 34 group, that it sounds like, well, I guess from what you were saying is that craft beer should go more towards the older group, I believe you said 35 to 44, to really push craft beer more to them than the younger crowd. Is it that you're seeing that the younger crowd is going for those NAs? And I forgot to mention the CBD beers or CBD seltzers and things like that. Are they going more for those than going to the craft beer?
Not necessarily. 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 have pretty similar levels of craft beer purchasing, but it's different, right? It's a different stage in life. So, we as general, I won't speak for everyone, we tend to drink a little bit more when we're 25 to 34 than when you're 35 to 44. And so craft is probably a lower percentage of the 25 to 34-year-old purchase bucket, but it's about the same level as 35 to 44. So people, as they age, they generally drink a little bit less, but they buy higher value products. They typically have a little bit more money, they're settled down a little bit more, they're more confident in their preferences. And, when I talk to brewers about demographics, it's never you should do this or you should do that, right? Because there's somebody of every age, of every gender, of every color who drinks, everything, right? And so what you should understand is, where are the opportunities for your brands, and where are places you're strong and where are places you're weak, and how are you going to shore that up? So, that might mean a different marketing and strategy for those 25 to 34-year-olds and a different one for 35 to 44. And, maybe you're not advertising the double IPA to the 44-year-olds as much as, oh, you liked that? Well, we've also got a Pilsner that you might like now that, you got a, like me, like got a 2-year-old to chase around in the morning and drink a double IPA is a little bit tough. So, to get back to your question, I wouldn't say there are different levels and there's, different demographics drink, but, I try never to tell brewers you should focus on one demographic or another, because lots of people drink beer, across all ages, across all demographics. And it's more about understanding who your customer is and then focusing, your brands on kind of the right places in the marketplace. And if you do that and you have a strategy, it's going to be more effective than just saying, well, all 25-year-olds are going to drink my beer, because some 25-year-olds don't drink any craft and some drink a lot. And you got to think a little bit more nuanced about how you reach out to those who are going to be receptive to what you're making.
Right. Makes sense. Kind of going back to the last part I was talking about with saturation, we were looking at, the numbers with Michigan, and, kind of along those saturation lines is that we here in Michigan are, I think according to the numbers, we were 6th overall in breweries in the country with 398, which one, I did not think we would ever get that high. And two, I really didn't think we would ever get that high. And then also that we are 12th in breweries per capita at 5.3 per 100,000 21 plus adults. Are we as a state reaching a point of craft brewery saturation, or do you see, based on the numbers, that we still have more room to grow?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that I've been asked in various forums since I started at the BA, when, there were a lot less breweries. So obviously, if people were asking it then, we clearly weren't at saturation then. I think this is another one you got to break apart a little bit, and even thinking at the state level is probably, too big. Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo area has a lot more breweries, per capita than other parts of the state. Now, does that mean the other parts of the state have room to grow? that's a separate question. But, even within states, there's going to be big variations. And so you need to break it apart. The other thing to say is that this is a moving target. So, craft has, BA defines it, 12% volume market share now. If craft had 20% market share, that would be a lot more opportunity out there. So the question, of saturation changes over time as, more or less people drink these beers. We see demographics. I think in general, what we're starting to see nationally is that there are places that are getting pretty close to mature, where it's a little bit more one in, one out. Those are really the densest places where, there's a craft beer on every neighborhood, the Portland, Oregons, parts of where I live, Denver, Colorado, where I think we're starting to see a little bit more. It's kind of one goes in, one goes out, that we're not seeing that kind of absolute growth. But lots of parts of the country aren't that way. I mean, think about how many towns in Michigan don't have a local brewery yet that probably have this population to support one. So, I think we can break apart this question. And this is a very economist way of answering. I think there might be parts of the state that can't take more breweries, but there's going to be parts that can. And so there's opportunity for growth as long as brewers are smart about where they go and smart about what their strategy is. They're not just going in, throwing in another brewery and making the same beers, but they're, they have something that makes them stand out.
Well, you've mentioned in previous discussions and previous interviews, whenever people talk about the bubble, you always bring out this one stat, and that about 75% of craft breweries sell less than 0.5% of the beers in the U.S. So collectively, 75 out of 100 breweries sell 1 out of every 200 cans, bottles, volume. Is this a stat that you're tracking and trending to predict a lot of different things within the area? Because we've always talked about hyper local, like the brew pub. The local brew pub is going to be where you're going to succeed as a brewery. In Michigan, you can download the Michigan Brewery Map app, which is a free app, Android and iOS, at mybeermap.com. Find every single open brewery and upcoming brewery in the state. But is that 0.5%, if you see it go up or go down, is that what you're following? Like, what do you get from that number?
Yeah, I mean, this stat points to kind of a second take on the question of saturation, which is it's irrelevant to know how many breweries there are without knowing how much beer those breweries make. Can we take 8,000 breweries in the country that look like Bell's? No. Can we take, 8,000 breweries that are a local brew pub or tap room and, are competing as much in the kind of bar restaurant space as in the brewery space? Yes. And so, I mean, this speaks back to the total saturation question too. Can we take another 5,000 breweries in the U.S. if they're content making 200 barrels a year and being in a local market where there's already not, this business model? Yeah. Can we take another, 5,000 breweries if they all want to be a production brewery and selling in grocery stores? No. So it is one I watch. That distribution has been remarkably stable, as craft has moved up. So that 75% under 1,000 barrels hasn't changed that much. Collectively, they've made a little bit more beer, but it's still a drop in the bucket. So maybe to spin this a few other ways. I mean that 75% added all together makes about as much as Sierra Nevada, who makes about 1% of what AB makes in the U.S. So, I mean, you're talking about a lot of breweries really not making a lot of beer in the context of a very, very big market with a lot of, thirsty drinkers here in the U.S. And it is one I watch. And certainly that distribution, how much the breweries are making is equally important to the number of breweries. And you can't say much about one without understanding the other.
I think factoring in a lot of those numbers, because Michigan has 400, we'll say, just to make the number nice and easy, 400 breweries, as you put it, each brewery is not the same. Each brewery is not Bell's or Founders or Atwater. Like, for example, Bee Nectar Meadery in Ferndale, Michigan is considered a brewery to the Brewers Association, but they brewed 3 barrels last year. But that is a brewery that, their bread and butter obviously is mead and cider. So their mead and cider numbers, they're going to, barrels upon barrels, thousands of barrels there because they distro, if I'm not mistaken, worldwide. But I was curious if that was the number, like what you guys are tracking. I do want to do a little bit of self-promotion real quick before we get into the conversations, because I want to bring Wendy in here in a moment. But after this release, we're going to be launching on our website an update to the Michigan Beer Numbers Project. We will have actually a full set of data and numbers all the way back to 2000. So if you want to trend your favorite breweries, see when they opened, when they closed, see how they were doing, where we were 10 years ago, you're going to be able to go to betterondraft.com to find all that. A lot of that is thanks to this man that we're talking to here, who does a lot of work over at the Brewers Association and posts the information for media and other brewers, or media like us and other brewers, to find that kind of information. So we appreciate that, and we want to thank you there. Again, that's going to be at betterondraft.com when we release this. I'm going to pass it to Wendy, and then we'll go to the question that we have in the Facebook chat.
I was actually going to ask the question in the Facebook chat.
Then we're going to go right to the one in the Facebook chat.
Charles, I believe it's Asperger. I'm going to probably screw that up, but Bart, we're seeing Walmart making an effort to expand their craft beer business. Is market saturation truly a concern? Walmart can't be the only big box chain looking to capitalize on the established acceptance. Could we maybe see a measurable volume increase with large chains finally jumping on the craft beer bandwagon?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've met with the Walmart team several times in recent years. They've looked to expand, and they're for those who aren't familiar, Walmart's rolling out what they call a store within a store. So they're really trying to expand and build what they think of as little liquor stores inside Walmarts, and increase the selection, along with that. And they're focusing there too on local. How can they understand that if you do this, you're going to have a different clientele, and you're going to want to have local beers in there. I think the big question there is, does that help grow the pie, or does that just redistribute the pie? Is Walmart taking sales from a local, another local liquor store, or are they adding? They bringing new customers in who suddenly see a local Michigan beer and say, I'm going to try that, and because I only shop at Walmart, I haven't seen this before, and so this is new. And I tend to think of it more on the opportunity side, that, the Walmart stats are crazy. It's, you look up some of these things, but, the percentage of the U.S. population that steps into a Walmart every week is like incredibly high. And so if they can, if some small percentage of those people try a local beer for the first time, that can grow the category. And so, we'll see how committed these retailers really are to this. We'll see how those sales grow. We'll see which brewers they choose to select in there. But I think that's a good example of, craft was doing that for years. It was getting new distribution. It was going to new places, and that's kind of stopped in the last few years. So if we can make that kind of final hurdle and get, more local craft into places like Walmart, I do think it can increase opportunities and grow the market a little bit.
Follows that up with also, what are your thoughts on beer clubs? Would loosening the laws on beer clubs in states like Michigan make a significant impact for small breweries?
Sorry, it broke up a little bit there at the end. I think the question was kind of about, beer clubs and delivery. And, those have evolved a lot, right? The beer club, I think for a lot of craft drinkers wasn't thought of particularly highly for years. And a lot of the beers were a little bit more cast off. But I think we've seen kind of as DTC has picked up energy that there's been a little bit more innovation there. And, the beer quality has improved, and they're being a little bit more thoughtful in the selection. So, I think there's opportunity there for sure as well. Some of this will depend on kind of what the laws look like and how much can that really be used in a lot of different places. But that's the kind of thing that's really helped wine and helped niche wineries grow a distribution footprint, go to new places, connect with new people. So I do think there's opportunities there, and there's opportunities there too to have that be the entry point, which that's something craft always has to be thinking about, and not become so insular that it's only the same people, but it's reaching out to new people, that new people are trying these beers for the first time. And I think beer clubs are a great way to do that, because they're often a gift. You can send them to somebody new. So I don't think it's going to move the needle a ton. Is this ever going to be a huge part of volume? No, but beer clubs, I think, can be one piece that plays in keeping new people coming to the category and building excitement.
All right. Oh, you're right. There you go.
Sorry, I have a creaky chair, so I keep putting it on mute so you don't hear that. So one of the things that we talk about a lot here on the show is that we cover Michigan state laws and liquor laws around the country. have you noticed a trend of some older or maybe bad laws that are being taken off the books, or some states creating post-COVID laws to help brewers and restaurants succeed?
Yeah, this is constantly evolving. Liquor is amongst the most, if not the most regulated industry in the U.S. So there's millions of laws in all places, and thanks to the 21st Amendment, we have different laws in every state across the country. So no shortage of opportunity to be changing things. I think the good news here is that most of the most stringent laws have really gone away. So breweries can sell direct to consumers almost everywhere. We're not at all states, but we're approaching 40 states where brewers can self-distribute, which means that they can deliver to a local retailer if they're not big enough to sign with a large distributor. I think the next laws that a lot of the state guilds are looking at are franchise laws. So kind of when a brewer signs with a distributor, it's a de facto marriage, locked in for life, and creating carve-outs that are sensible. So when a really small brewer who's not a big part of the distributor portfolio isn't happy that they can pay a fee and they can move to a new distributor and try their brand somewhere else. And then another big push that the Brewers Association is supporting in a lot of states is direct to consumer. Wineries can ship. You go to a Michigan winery. If you're from anywhere in the country and you visit beautiful Michigan and you want to get wine shipped home, you can ship wine to, I think it's 45 states now around the country. You go to a Michigan brewery, they can't ship you that beer. So if they're not sold in the state where you go to, you can't find that again. And there's only, I believe, a dozen states where you can ship beer right now. And so we're looking to close that gap, because that's a place where really small brewers, that it's not going to move the needle, right? For, a large brewer, they're going to be in distribution, they're going to be in stores. But for a really small brewer, if they can sell, a few cases to people who visited them, throughout the year, that can really move the needle. And so that's another one we're working on and hope to see improve, and hope that the pandemic showed people too that things like delivery and shipping can be done safely and easily, and there's consumer demand there.
Definitely something I'm looking forward to. Dan, I think you had some questions.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious on this. What's your opinion on hard seltzers, and how do the numbers interact with the barrel and production numbers posted by your association?
Yeah, so we track separately. So, for members, when we do presentations, we talk about the seltzer numbers, but they aren't included in our numbers. So, craft numbers would look a little bit better if you included those, because those are growing faster than traditional beer, even for small brewers. Kind of at a top level, my thought is that, it's an innovation that clearly consumers like. There's a reason they're growing in the marketplace. I think they reflect a lot of the things that light beer was, when it started in the 70s and 80s. But for next generation, they're easy to drink. They're, the things that you would talk about when you talk about, a light beer commercial, crisp and sessionable. But they have some attributes that the current generation likes. They're often gluten-free, and, they have some stuff that, you can imagine somebody who's turning 21 today that, it appeals to them, equally, if not more, as we see in the numbers, to light beer. So in terms of craft, we haven't seen a huge overlap there. There's some, but the consumers, when you have an occasion where you want to, drink a couple of, Trulies or whatever it is, I'm drawing a blank, and I know Shorts has a local one in Michigan. I'm drawing a blank on their brand. They'll be mad at me. There we go. Beaches, yeah. So, you want that. That's probably not the same occasion where you might have been drinking an Imperial Stout or a double IPA. Maybe there is overlap with, a lighter craft style, but, I think it's going to be a challenge for craft on one hand, because it's introducing people to different flavors that very distinctly aren't beer flavors. But at the same time, it's an opportunity, because it's going to get new people who would not have been in the beer aisle in the beer aisle. And so, eyeballs on your brands and an opportunity to win. And, I think with all these new innovations, craft brewers have to think about, why does the consumer want this, and what can I offer them that maybe has some of those similar attributes? And that's the way I always try to spin it to brewers when I talk about it.
Awesome. Too, real quick, what was that beer you were drinking at the start of the show? I want to make sure I heard it correct.
I'm still working through it. So a Face Down Brown from Telluride Brewing.
I thought so. The last half hour, I've had a certain Two Live Crew song stuck in my head ever since you told the name of that. If you know, I'm not going to repeat the full name of it. Anyways, I wanted to ask you too, because you live in Colorado. We went through something similar here. I'm actually in Arizona, but with New Belgium being sold to Kirin, as a resident there in Colorado and a beer fan, of course, what was the response from the public like for that sale?
Yeah, different people have a different response. I think, there are a percentage of beer geeks who are very in the know and very, interested and committed to this, who cared a lot, and, maybe won't buy those products. And there's others who clearly don't. New Belgium sales had a pretty good year this year. A little hard to tell kind of exactly in Colorado with the pandemic, and we moved to grocery store sales. There's a lot of moving pieces. But, I'll say more broadly, we at the Brewers Association, we represent independent brewers, and we noticed a gap in how much people say they care and then how much they know. It is my job to know those deals happen, who's owned by who. It's not the average person standing in a beer aisle. And so this is one of the reasons we created the Independent Craft Brewer Seal, which independent craft brewers can put on their beers if they want, because our polling told us that, 70% of craft brewers said they cared that somebody was independent. Whether they really do or not, we can have that debate. But, they say it in surveys consistently year over year with new people. But when you ask them, is this person owned by somebody? Is this person owned by somebody? People are just guessing. People have no clue because, I'm sure some of your listeners, are committed enough, listen to a beer podcast. They care about this stuff. But, the average beer drinker doesn't think about this in their off day. They just want to drink a tasty beer. And we thought that seal was a good way to close that gap, right? You care, we'll make it easy. You see it on the label. If you really care about this, now you can pick between the two. And we hope in the long run, that's going to move the needle for independent brewers.
And it's funny you mentioned that too, because the largest brewery here where I'm at in Arizona was bought out by Anheuser-Busch a few years ago, and people swear they'll never drink it again. But at the same time, they're chasing trucks to get their Bourbon County right after they're refusing to drink some Four Peaks. But, those in the industry here in Michigan didn't know much about San Miguel buying out Founders. Why do you think the public reaction of Founders being purchased was, so wishy-washy or mediocre?
I think it's, again, there's not the general public, I don't think has huge awareness of these kind of things. I mean, we see this in just the broader corporate environment, right? Like, nobody knows all the brands Nestle owns, and companies work hard to do that and to keep that, kind of local cred as much as possible. I think that's again where, trade associations and other, promoting bodies can try to play a role, and small brewers can tell their own unique story to try to differentiate. But, I think it's hard. Like, I sympathize with the beer drinker. Like, you want a beer, you want something that's tasty, it's a Friday right now. Like, we all worked hard this week. Like, you want something to relax. You're not thinking necessarily about, who owns who. And that's where, I think we can play a role in kind of, closing that gap, because it's not the beer drinker's job to keep track of all this stuff. And so the easier, breweries and associations can make it to help them, pick stuff that aligns with what they want to support, the better.
I want to tie in because I want to give you an answer, and I want to see if you, Bart, the not Brewers Association Bart, but Bart, the person who knows a lot. One of the things that I noticed is that there is a big difference between when Anheuser-Busch, Molson Coors buys a brewery, or Kirin, Lagunitas, San Miguel. Like, there is a huge difference to the mind and the eyes of the user. Because in Michigan, we've made it a joke for a while. We've had Founders on the show a handful of times. We've always made it a joke that they're not craft beer, quote unquote. They're still beer. People still love them. We talk about them. If you've never had it before, I 100% highly suggest you mix KBS and Milwaukee's Best to get you the Kentucky Beast Stout. One of the best beers that I've ever had, mixing beers together. That's actually not even like a bullshit like that. It tastes like a lighter, flowy KBS. It
was delicious. It was a great idea.
I feel like if it's not ABI or Molson Coors, then it's just kind of like it happened. Is that what you see when people buy? Because to counter that, even that point, countering my own point, when 10th and Blake purchased Atwater here in Michigan, I don't even think people noticed. Like, it just kind of happened. But yeah. I still feel like there's a big stank on ABI Molson Coors versus these other entities. But I want to know if that's what you see within the community and the numbers itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent that's probably true, right? ABI is they're the big bad behemoth, not just in the U.S., globally. I mean, largest beer company in the world by far. And, they've also done some things. I mean, many people remember that Super Bowl commercial where, they took direct shots at craft beer. So, I mean, they've acted in a different way than a lot of these other companies that a lot of people aren't aware of. I think also just that the brands that people associate with them, like, ask people, San Miguel, like, name a beer they make in the US, and like, people don't know. Everybody knows who Anheuser-Busch, the brands that they make. And so they have a very different association with them as a beer company to these, foreign companies that I don't think they have a strong kind of an identity. So I think some of it's just a reaction to the brand identity that they already have of these companies. And if you don't have one of these, foreign owned brewers, then the reaction is just naturally going to be weaker. And, I think that's true in industry too, that, in the Brewers Association definition, to kind of put back on my hat for a second, is about, kind of the advantages it confers. And certainly there are advantages to being owned by any global brewer in terms of expertise and raw materials, but there are a lot of advantages to being owned by a big US brewer in terms of just access to market and kind of, boots on the ground they already have. And I think that's what people in the industry always really react to in these deals as well.
I want to comment on what you said, because in my mind, because I have a lot of marketing background, when Budweiser has that type of promotion that was anti-craft, so the pumpkin peach Pyreneesian pale ale or whatever, that's Budweiser as a brand, not Anheuser-Busch as an organization. You're nodding your head yes, which makes me feel a little better about what I'm about to say, because I feel like these are just when I think of marketing, Bud Light is an anti-Budweiser product. Busch is an anti-Budweiser product because it's a cheaper version of Budweiser. Like, I don't read too much into these anti-craft, or when Bud Light did the Dilly Dilly commercials for anti-mead, loose anti-mead, just mead happened to be part of the Renaissance culture. I just feel like the marketing itself isn't necessarily anti-craft, because they have loose crafty beer in their portfolio.
Yeah, from a marketing perspective, 100% agree, right? Those brand managers aren't thinking about, they're thinking about their brand. They're not thinking about the wider, I mean, a couple things I would say is, one, I think there just is a industry reaction to anybody taking shots at beer, generally. Why not make fun of the dude who's sipping this fancy cocktail? And not, take a shot at somebody who's, engaged in the same profession as you are. I think second, there's a reminder that, yes, these are different brands and, they're different things, that then if you support, one, you're going into the larger pot of money that, then is taking shots at, kind of the other hand. And, consumers, people are nuanced. I think this is where that, on the one hand, you can recognize, these are different things. And, Bud Light people probably aren't talking to the Goose Island or the Four Peaks or the other kind of craft collective people, and also know that, like, okay, then this company doesn't make a lot of sense if they, if they're pitching different things to different people, what do they really stand for? And that's something I think the large brewers have struggled with a little bit. How do we offer everything under the sun at every price point, and reconcile that as kind of one company? And that's something I think they're getting better at, as they spend more time and money in these kind of new spaces and branch out beyond beer as well. But it's an interesting question, and it's one that I'm sure they're thinking about a lot.
I want to bring up something, because obviously as COVID hit, there was a lot of doom and gloom back in April, March, April, May of last year. I came out on this podcast, and I am so happy to be wrong. But as someone who lost their job, who was in the industry itself, I said that we were going to lose half our breweries. Because I believed that there was a lot of brew pubs, a lot of small batch breweries that wouldn't be able to survive because distribution was something they couldn't rely on. We saw in Michigan, Oddside and Austin Brothers explode in their distribution when they had to move away from on-premise sales. Without touching on the politics of it and, state v. state, what are the results that we're seeing in some of these other states, especially with the restriction? Because you used to teach health politics. Did I read that right?
I did at one point, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
over at Iowa, go Hawkeyes. I'm not a fan. I just know my teams. But how does the political choices of our government, how did that react into the restaurant industry, and where do you think we are and where we will be in a year from now?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that there was a lot of doom and gloom. I shared in a lot of that, and the brewers did too. I mean, we did surveys of brewers, and
Oh no, his audio cut out. Bart, oh no.
Oh, connecting to audio. Hold on.
Yep, we're trying again. Bart, we're not hearing you. You're muted right now.
No, my headphones died, so let's try that again.
Okay.
All right, so
okay. Start from the beginning. I can cut this.
Yeah. No, it was a great question, and I shared that doom and gloom at the beginning. I mean, I think a lot of people were very worried about it, and the brewers themselves were too. I mean, the brewers, when we did surveys in the first months of the pandemic, huge percentages of them thought they were going to have to close, and I don't think they really anticipated how much they would be able to pivot, both business-wise and with their customers, as well as on the government side. Things like on the restaurant side, to-go cocktails, and brewery side, increased ability to do more to go and delivery, and really transition selling that draft beer in packaged form was a lot bigger than anybody had been through. And at some level, like, I don't know how you would have known this, right? And this is all our first pandemic, and we didn't really know what customers were going to do, if anybody was gonna show back up. Would somebody be willing to make an extra stop in the middle of a pandemic at a brewery to pick up a case of beer? Like, I wouldn't have bet money on that. I mean, I did it. It was my first instinct too, to go to the local brewers who I wanted to support, and like, I'm going to buy a bunch of beer from you because I want you to be here in a month when this all shakes out. But it was very unsure, and we did, to the credit of the states, we saw a lot of states move very quickly to relax rules on delivery, on to go. This was not just in breweries, but in beverage alcohol generally, and going forward, we're right in the middle of kind of those conversations at the state level about how much of this we're going to keep. To-go cocktails were super popular. So we think we've seen, it's 20 plus states now make that permanent and just say, hey, this was a great idea. Nobody got harmed. And a lot of restaurants, found a new way of doing business. On the brewery side, a lot of these rules are still set to sunset. So whether they can sell via delivery, DTC already talked about, can you ship to customers? Those are conversations and political fights that are going to happen over the next couple of years. And I hope if this has shown us anything, it's that, these small businesses are going to do this compliantly, that they can do it safe and effectively, and that this gets the products that, 21 plus drinkers want to have into their hands in safe and legal ways. And hopefully this will be proved to be in the long run an opportunity in really expanding the way that small breweries can do business.
I mean, I love the answer. I was very, very hesitant at that time. I think I saw a lot of the same statistics you did, especially when I was working for Toast Point of Sale. Like, we were seeing a lot of restaurants who there was no light at the end of the tunnel because they just couldn't see it, and there was a lot of governmental assistance, the PPP loans, the assistance, attempting to be clear and concise on the rules. It's just there was so much good that happened out of it, and especially the law changes too. We had in Michigan had a lot of law changes that assisted with drinking districts, the ability to self-distro and increasing that self-distro number, because we have had for a while, and we still do, a very low number of self-distribution in the state of Michigan. I believe we're only at 2,500 barrels, where if you reach 2,500 barrels, you have to go into a second tier. That used to be 1,000. Which, if you look at the Great Lakes states, I think in Colorado, you guys are 25,000. Is that correct?
It depends on license type, but it's unlimited here. Coors owns their own distributing here.
Okay.
And I'll jump in and, one thing to say too is I think we can oversell how, the resilience and how much brewers are able to pivot and sell this as like a good thing. And, it should be clear, this wasn't good for breweries. Like, very few breweries made out like bandits. Selling the same amount of beer in can and package form over the bar versus selling somebody a pint when they come in. Breweries make less money. They take on more costs. So So, this wasn't positive, and these are all kind of silver linings on very dark clouds. And I think that's important to get across, because sometimes, people kind of are like, well, breweries made out like bandits, or, they fall into that, well, everybody drank more during the pandemic, so breweries must have done great. And, I'm spinning some of the positive of the business model changes breweries were able to make. But, most breweries came through this with, finances that were not anywhere near as good, even with the government assistance that went into them as they went into it. So,
well, as this man is talking, again, he put together a list of all the breweries and their production numbers, which will be available to the public for Michigan. At betterondraft.com. Let's say the 20th, June 20th, it'll be readily available and good for you to go. And you can see for yourself. You can see how those, most breweries went down in production unless they were able to easily pivot. And those two breweries that I mentioned, Oddside and Austin Brothers, they are definitely the exception to the rule. Oddside obviously exploded with their seltzers. I don't know if you get any Oddside seltzers over there, but they've got 25 different versions of their seltzer here in Michigan. Different flavors. My new current favorite is their Moscow Mule, which I am very happy to have. But as we roll out and we're going to end this podcast, once again, I want to thank you. Don't forget to follow Bart on Twitter. It's Brewers Stats. That's back-to-back S's, Brewers Stats. If you're a metrics nerd, a graph nerd, a number nerd, a nerd for business in general, this is definitely a site you want to, a Twitter page you want to follow. Whenever I want to look at what's going on in the beer industry, I go check out the graphs that you post. So I appreciate all the work that you do. But as we end the show, everyone kind of asks a final question. So I'm going to start with Rob. Rob, what is your final question for Bart here?
Final question. You had mentioned on NOLA Drinks with Brian Diaz, and shout out to his show. I was listening to that the other day, and it was a really good, awesome conversation. But you had talked about the can shortage that happened last year and how breweries had to pivot in putting their liquids into cans, but in the midst of a can shortage, we got to have a problem with that. What I'm curious of is that, do we still have that problem here in 2021? Or is that something now in the past that breweries can now just, if they want to put their stuff in cans, they don't have to freak out with the thought of, crap, I'm going to get some canning machines, but am I going to be able to get aluminum?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's still, I would maybe less shortage and more tightness, but it's still with us. And, breweries can't just, say like, oh, I want to get as many cans as I can get now. And we're still, as a country, we're kind of in a deficit when it comes to cans because, it wasn't just beer either. It was soda. It was everything. Overnight we stopped going out into the world and we started bringing everything in, and I'm bringing a lot of cans into our house. And that, that's another factor that really limited the ability of some brewers to pivot. That they could have sold more if they could have gotten more cans and been able to sell more stuff. And hopefully it's going to ease a lot in the back half of the year. We've got a number of can facilities getting built in the U.S., which will hopefully make things better. But brewers found a lot of unique solutions. If you find any brewers suddenly have 3 ridges on the top of their cans, that means they found cans from Hawaii. I've started to see those show up in Colorado because Hawaii market dropped because nobody went there, and so there were extra wine cans sitting around. You see a lot of brewers put extra strength sleeves or some other kind of label on top of something that had already been printed. But it's still a problem, and I think we'll see kind of the sense of it this summer. The summer will be, how much did on-premise come back, and how many more cans do we need, and are we still really short, or are we only kind of short? Because summer's always peak demand for cans.
My favorite that I saw, I bought a 6-pack of Dark Horse beer, and when I saw the label, and you could see the label under the label because it was a pre-printed can, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what it is, and I opened it up and it was like a brew dog, and I'm like, oh Jesus, like not even the same state, not even the same brewery, because I've had a few where like they put the new label over the old label, but this was just a completely different brewery itself. Dan, what's your final question here for Mr. Watson? Dan, you're muted. Congratulations. Welcome to 2021.
Yeah, I know. I failed on that one. So let's switch this up a little bit. So you get challenged to an Edward 40 Hands contest. What type of malt liquor are you using for this?
What type of malt liquor am I using for Edward 40 Hands? I feel like I chose Country Club for some reason in college. So, I'll go there for the nostalgia. I like the brands the original brands that they originally, marketed as super upscale, and they just kept the names all the time. So Go find some of those commercials on YouTube, people. There's like one of like some, a waiter in a black tux, serving people Country Club.
It's amazing.
Never heard of Country Club until
I haven't either, but that's pretty awesome.
If you look at like when people post photos of 40s like all in a line, it's in there. I literally am looking at this one, and it's got King Cobra, I know, St. Ides, Steel Reserve, Hurricane, Old English, like I know all of these, but Country Club I had never heard of. I wonder if that's a locale thing over by you.
It may be, my earliest legal drinking days were on the West Coast, so maybe it has a bigger presence on the West Coast.
What about you, Wendy?
So I'm curious, as our numbers guy, what trend do you see happening this year? What do you want to predict? We all love to predict stuff on this show, so what's yours?
Yeah, there's so much room. I mean, there's so many predictions I could make. I think we're going to continue to see, growth in kind of the polar ends of craft. We're going to see the high ABV stuff and the low ABV stuff. We're going to see the light, things, pilsners, golden ales, blonde ales, and also the really bold stuff, barrel aged stuff, sours. So I think we're going to continue to kind of see the widening of the middle gap in craft, and you're going to see more and more. It's going to be kind of light and low ABV or big and bold, and that's a little bit unfortunate to those of us who like drinking, the 5 to 6%, pale ales or a brown ale. But that's the trend the consumers want, so that's what'll happen.
All right. So, my final question, gonna tie in a little bit to that, but as someone who is a metrics nerd, I was the person who, whenever Rex Halfpenny came out with his numbers magazine for the state of Michigan beer, I was the first one to grab it. I would search it. I would make a special trip to Dragon Mead or Rochester Mills to go grab the Michigan beer guide for it. What is the statistic that you're going to be keeping your eye on for the next few years on the craft beer industry? Like, what is that one thing that you just feel like you need to watch because it'll help you, talk about the industry later?
Yeah, I mean, other than overall production, right now it's draft production. So many breweries still, even with the pivot, we're able to survive but not thrive. And until we get, a vibrant draft beer scene, not just at breweries, but in, bars and restaurants, again, it's going to be tough for a lot of small brewers. So there's a bunch of ways you can get this, state numbers, federal numbers, but every time the Tax and Trade Bureau, which is our federal body, publishes a new keg production number, that's my go-to. How does that look versus our previous trend? Because that'll tell you a lot about kind of where we are, both in getting back to normal, but also a lot about the health of small brewers.
And I'm going to use this time because we have a few extra minutes. I'm going to ask you one more question because I run this show and I can. My question is, you've talked about how you do a lot of studying and looking into the governmentals and the laws of craft beer. What is a law you wish you could change either in the state of Colorado or in the country of the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, Colorado has pretty good laws, so I don't have too many complaints about living here. I think in general in the U.S., I mean, the brewers in the states that don't have self-distribution, I mean, that's probably number one, just right there. Brewers should have the right if they want to sell beer to a retailer, and we're still at, I think it's 11 states that don't have that right, and so that's for our members, if I could snap my fingers overnight, self-distribution anywhere in the country for small brewers, that would probably be the top one. So we, mostly it's the deep South left, and places like Alabama and Mississippi. So hopefully we'll see that change in the next coming years, and those brewers will be able to prove whether their beers can make it or not before they have to sign with the distributor.
All right, well, that's going to do it. Episode 261, Better on Draft podcast. You can find Bart on Twitter at Brewers Stats. That's back-to-back S's for all the information. You can also follow the Brewers Association on Instagram, which is at Brewers ASSOC. Tito wants to ask Nick's final question. Nick is the host that's not here, so we're going to end. Tito, what's your guilty pleasure beer?
With my guilty pleasure beer?
Yep.
I don't know that I have a guilty pleasure beer. certainly as a Coloradan, every Colorado brewer drinks a lot of Coors Banquet. That's the beer, that's the non-craft beer that Colorado brewers, you see them out drinking. If they're not drinking the craft beer, they're probably drinking Coors Banquet. So I'll look out that one as well.
All right. No matter what you think of your beer, we think it's better on draft. Have a good night.
Peace.